It's the winningfornextyear.com podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell. On the other end of the line is Andrew Schnitke. How's it going, Andrew?
Oh, I'm doing good, and I'm very happy to have you back podcasting.
Thanks. I'm happy to have you on. I kind of thought coming into the day that we would talk about the Browns, and then John Beilein and the Cavs vaulted to the top of the news cycle.
Once again, the Cavs happened.
Yeah. So first of all, what was your initial reaction when you read the news that he had slipped up or said the word thug in front of a bunch of young African-American males? And yep. I mean, obviously there are multiple angles that we can explore here, but first of all, what was your reaction?
My reaction was, quite frankly, disappointment. I was really, really disappointed. There was a sense of, oh my God, here we go again. My initial reaction was also, I don't know how he keeps his job. I expected this to snowball and be one of those kind of news cycles that just doesn't go away. I kind of expected it to get louder and louder until something had to be done. So I would say that's where I started. I did move away from that a little bit, but definitely disappointment. It's a disappointing thing. Like, I'm sure we'll get into talking about, a little bit more about like what might have happened and, what it really means and all this and that. But just on the surface, just that to have this slip up, whatever the reason may be, it was just very disappointing. It's been a hard season to begin with. It just seems like there's just one drama after another with the Cavs this season. And, the season started out so fun. Like, this team for the first week or two was a blast to watch. And the starting lineup was competitive against other really good teams. And I just thought, this might actually just be a fun season with low expectations and, not going to make the playoffs or anything, but we might just be in for a fun year. And man, like, it just went to hell after that. And so this just seems like the latest thing in a growing cycle of frustration and distraction and noise and, like I said, drama. And it was just very disappointing.
So my initial reaction was confusion. I didn't understand. Number one, I don't understand how that guy makes that mistake.
Right.
It doesn't even make sense in context. And so while that doesn't excuse it, that opens it up to maybe it was Freudian, which then that kind of potentially erodes trust even more.
Yep.
That, the idea that somebody might say something inappropriate on purpose or by accident, but the Freudian thing kind of makes you look side eye at people.
Yeah, I think without a doubt. And I think that's what's tough about it is like, we have to like really ask ourselves, and it's a hard thing to answer, cause I don't know John Beilein. Let me back up here. Let me just start off by saying, I don't think John Beilein is a racist. I just want to say that because, I don't think you can coach for 45 years, the sport of basketball, while being an overt racist. However, I just think it's important to say that because I think sometimes that can be people's knee-jerk reaction is to go there. But I don't think, you have to be a racist to say inappropriate things, to have inappropriate thoughts. And, he's an older guy. He comes from a different generation where people talked about African-American basketball players very differently than they do today, And
frankly, he's old enough that terminology has changed 3, 4, 5 different times, not to mention coded words and coded language, because honestly, you and I didn't grow up with thug being a racial term. It kind of became one, I heard it talked about earlier on the radio, and it kind of hit home for me that, it was kind of like that Allen Iverson time period with the dress code and all that stuff.
Yep. That's absolutely where it started, taking on a different connotation. There was this idea, and, like somebody asked me today, they were asking me about this at work, and they were saying, well, what does that even mean to say that they were playing like thugs? And I said, well, I think there's an implication that goes along with it of sort of like this undisciplined street ball, and that's like an inner city basketball, that the playgrounds, like that kind of thing, like that's kind of the root of it. And you're right, a lot of that stemmed out of that. We'll call it the Iverson era, but obviously there was a lot more than just Allen Iverson. There was a lot of players that had some issues with, legal issues and things like that, and people were projecting an image of all basketball players, and that the sport had become overwhelmingly black, and that it was out of control, and that all basketball players were thugs, and that's where that all sort of came out of. And so you're right in the fact that it definitely is a newer term, and it's something that we're of the age now where we're old enough that we've seen a lot of words that we grew up using, not just racial, just all kinds of words that you're not allowed to say anymore. But you have to adapt to that, and you understand why you can't say those words, and you don't say them. And I've washed a lot of words out of my vocabulary that maybe I used to use when I was a kid that are very inappropriate. And I don't just
you don't fight to keep them
just because it's what's that.
And you don't fight to keep them. Like
that's right.
I get it. Like I'm not out here on the kids' playground trying to justify or fight for them to be able to play smear the queer.
Right.
It's over. We shouldn't have said it when I was a kid.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I was getting at there. Is we don't not say it just because people tell us we can't say it. You understand like what words can mean and the power of words, and how they can affect other people. And you understand, like, you don't have to use those words. Like we can express emotions with other words.
And you know what else, Andrew? I also simultaneously think people are too sensitive. I really do. But my own actions, I molded my own actions to change the language and the words that I use. So both things can happen simultaneously. It's not one. If you think people are too sensitive, that doesn't mean that you should be using words that we used 25 years ago that are no longer kind of acceptable in our current culture.
Yeah, and that's kind of you talk a lot about sort of context and how you're going to use the words and things like that, and that sometimes things like that can be a little bit more nebulous, but you just like I don't know. Did you see Stephen A. Smith's take on it?
I did not.
On Beilein, his was interesting because he seemed to be he was on Beilein's side, and he actually was saying that he didn't care that he called them thugs because he called them this in a closed setting behind closed doors where it was a film session. It was just them, and he felt that in that context it was okay because he was just talking to people that he knew, and that it would have been a lot different if he would have said it to the press that all my players are playing like thugs. And that to me, that's when you're like really getting into the weeds, and I don't know how to parse all that. Like, well, okay, how is it okay in a smaller group setting? I suppose. Like, to me, the fact that the reaction, I mean, according to the story, players were visibly shocked, taken aback by this. Like, it affected the players. Like, there's no doubt about it. Unless you think that Woj was completely making this up, it affected the players. And I don't think that's right, even in a closed setting. Like this is still like a workplace. Like, I can't imagine, like, in the workplace, like you calling names to your employees. Like I can't imagine that happening in too many workplaces. Like, you can yell at them, but to call them offensive names, like I don't think that's quite appropriate.
Well, and I don't think assuming he did say thug, and he's kind of said, I don't remember, but I must have because people said I did. But like, assuming that he did say that, do you really think that's what he meant? Does it even make sense to you that he would want to use that kind of language that he wouldn't know better?
Yeah, that's where it really gets hard, and I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's like trying to understand, like, well, did he mean to say slugs, and would you really use that phrase? And I find it hard to believe. I do. I find it hard to believe that he meant to say slug.
I think it's more plausible than thugs, because contextually it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I mean, I'm not going to fight over it because neither one of us know,
right.
you know?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just think, I don't know, like I wasn't there, so I don't know how it was said. And so maybe it's not even fair for me to try to say what he meant to say without hearing the way it was actually said. Like, what was the lead up? What was the sentences before that? And that's why this is so hard for us to wrap our head around, because you don't understand what he was trying to say, because I don't really know what he was trying to say.
So what did you think about the rest of the reaction? I mean, I know you referenced Stephen A. Smith, and we talked about some different things that we saw. It says a lot about John Beilein and his reputation to me that it didn't end up being a quote on LeBron's lips or one of the powerful players who could pretty much instantaneously get somebody in the league fired.
Yeah, I think that the fact that he immediately called the players and talked to them probably went pretty far in helping keep this story limited to what it was. I think if he would not have apologized, if he would have drawn a line in the sand and been like, abrasive about it or pushed back against the reaction he was getting, I think if that would have happened, then you might have heard some other players speaking up about it, like specifically LeBron, who is kind of like the one you look for whenever a big story happens in the NBA. You kind of, everybody takes a cue from LeBron's reaction to it. And the fact that, unless LeBron did and I didn't see it, but I didn't see LeBron have anything to say about this. We haven't actually heard from any of the players yet. At least I haven't seen any of the players address it.
Larry Nance talked about it.
Oh, did he? Okay. What did he say about it?
There's a lot of stuff like he addressed it like a man. He addressed it directly with us. I'm paraphrasing. Don't quote me directly,
sure.
But yeah, it was a lot of that stuff. Like, can't justify making mistakes is okay, but addressing it like a man.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I do think that it,
which is sexist, by the way, and Larry Nance should be ashamed of himself. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm kidding. But no, I just think, the story that came out then this afternoon, that he also then addressed it in a meeting with the players today, and it was supposedly he was very emotional in his apology. He was very apologetic. So from that standpoint, I'm generally a person that's pretty forgiving and willing to give people a second chance, especially if they have a contrite apology. Because we all make mistakes. There's certain things you say, well, I don't know that I would ever do that, and I don't know that I would ever slip up like he did, but I don't know, maybe I'll say something stupid at some point in my life where that wasn't quite exactly what I intended to say. I don't know. And, I would hope that people would give me the benefit of the doubt, that they know my true character and things like that. And so I think for the people who are around him the most, if the players are okay with it and they accept his apology, if Kobe Altman is okay with it and accepted his apology and is willing to let him go on, I kind of think that we should follow their cue and just say, okay, he handled it. Nobody is condoning it. Nobody's saying that it was okay or, anything like that. Obviously, it was a big story and something very stupid. And I'm still very disappointed that he said it and that all this happened. But, I'm willing to just sort of follow everybody's lead and say, okay, let's kind of move past this and move on.
It's an interesting thing, accepting apologies, because I think one of the reasons we find ourselves where we are with kind of the Twitter culture and the attack culture, the pile-on culture, is that we've graduated from apology culture where we wanted everybody to apologize all the time, and then nobody would accept the apology. So then people stopped apologizing.
Or they did the apology if anyone was offended.
Right. And so now, or somebody would apologize and it would get picked apart. Like you couldn't fall on the sword hard enough for some people. And so I think that's led a lot of people to just kind of stick their chin out and go, I'm just not going to apologize at all. And I think that's far worse. So while I don't think everybody should apologize for everything all the time, I do think the culture of accepting apologies and allowing people to learn from mistakes, while it sounds like we're talking about a kindergarten class, I think in this day and age, we need it.
Well, yeah, because I think too, there's always that issue too of like who exactly is owed an apology. Like, I'm sure Beilein probably said I apologize to the fans and to the organization and all that, but like, are we owed an apology from John Beilein? Like, I would argue, well, particularly not me as a
right
as a white fan, like he doesn't owe me an apology at all, but really it's the players that were in the room, the ones that he was referring to as thugs, the ones who were affected by what he said. Those are the ones that he especially owed the apology to. And like I said, by all accounts, like that apology happened. This didn't drag out. There was no like contrived apology leading to a real apology like you see sometimes or anything like that. Like, it just sounds like it was just as soon as he was told, what he said, and he realized sort of what had happened, what he said, he acted immediately, called the players, talked to them, held the meeting today, again, emotionally apologized. And, like you said, like, we're just kind of to the point where that just seems to be okay. Like everybody handled it and, everybody's willing to move on.
But by the time you're hearing this, somebody could take it up as a cause, make a big issue out of it. It could re-explode and the Cavs could fire John Beilein.
That definitely could happen as well. Yes.
How many times have we seen additional flare-ups, like aftershocks?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen it so many times, whether it be, especially with like the coaching scandal. Like, you think about like going back to Jim Tressel, when
we thought he was going to survive.
We did, and that was the whole Gordon Gee saying, I just hope he doesn't fire me, in regards to Tressel.
Oh God, it was so embarrassing.
When they announced that, the original punishment, and we just kind of all like it. Everybody was just kind of like, oh, like maybe he's going to survive this. Well, then the stories just kept going and it kept going, and then eventually it became inevitable. And then even like with Urban Meyer, I think when he served his suspension.
Oh, hang on a second. That's an interesting point. If one Michigan player from the last X number of years, he was at Michigan from 2007 to 2019, if one Michigan player comes out and says, oh yeah, that's not the first time he called players thugs, he's going to get fired.
Oh, yep.
Because this is the point where, like, if this was a Twitter thing, people would be searching your history.
Your timeline. Yep. No, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
And I think that's a scary world to live in. But in this case,
sure.
I mean, I guess if he does have a habit of saying that,
yeah,
I think we would have heard it already, though.
You would have thought it would have been an issue at Michigan, right? Like, if you would have said it, like, I would think it would have been an issue at that time. I would imagine there would have been talk of transfers or, or letting him go at that point, so I would say I wouldn't expect it, but I think that's a really good point. You're absolutely right that if one player comes out and does say, like, no, like, that's who he is, he uses that word all the time, it's going to flare back up and be another issue.
All right, well, let's leave that one for here because I don't know what else we can accomplish just by speculating.
Sure.
So let's skip the Indians. Let's move over to the Browns. And I haven't talked to you on this podcast in a long time, but certainly we haven't talked since the Browns cleaned house. So before we get to the coaching search, which is something that could render this podcast useless again by somebody getting hired, kind of explain to everybody where your head was when Jimmy Haslam cleaned house again, and first of all firing Freddie, and then a day later firing the man who was allowed to make a statement on Freddie's firing. John Dorsey.
Well, I think with the Freddie thing, I think as much as we all hate that the Browns have this history of firing coaches, after 1 year or a year and a half or whatever, like, and we all want that continuity. I think with Freddie, it had reached a point where it was just very clear that this job was not for him, that it was too much for him. He couldn't handle it. He was in way over his head. I would argue it was actually a very disastrous hire on so many different levels. Like, it was just abundantly clear to me that he had to go. And I didn't come to that point quickly. I think I was probably one of the people who held on the longest to wanting to give Freddie time to learn on the job. And I felt like maybe at one point in the season, they were starting to show some signs of improvement, that they weren't committing as many penalties. And
they went on a win streak.
They went on a little win streak. And I thought, well, maybe this is turning out of them, but everything fell apart. And by the end of the year, it was clear that it was best for Freddie to go.
And so, quite honestly, the news that we'd been hearing from behind the scenes from the beat reporters about how it was the most undisciplined team they'd ever been around, like that it doesn't matter what you're doing on the field. Like, that kind of a system is doomed to failure.
Yep, for sure. So that part I agreed with. I will say I originally thought that Dorsey should keep his job. I felt that I wanted still to have some front office stability. I felt like, while I didn't agree with all of Dorsey's moves, and obviously hiring Freddie was a complete disaster that falls on Dorsey's shoulders, I kind of just thought, well, he's brought in a lot of really good players, and the team is a lot better than they were when he took over. But then, like, as I heard some of the stories that have come out since about some of the turmoil that was going on behind the scenes, and some of the other issues, and just really reflected on just how bad the Freddie hire really was, and maybe thinking about the reason why he made that Freddie hire. Was he a little bit more concerned about being in charge still, and he didn't want a strong head coach, and would that affect this future coaching search? So I kind of changed my stance, and I've come to feel okay with them letting Dorsey go.
Well, see, and I don't necessarily. So I think Dorsey's flaw, and I think it plays out with players. Like, I don't think Dorsey's a bad guy. I think his issue is that he wants to believe the best in people. And I'm, obviously I don't work in the NFL, but I've hired people before, and I'm guilty of that a lot, where when I'm interviewing people, I'm not qualifying them as much as I'm looking at the very best version of them and the very best way that they could possibly work out in my organization. And I think John Dorsey does that a lot, whether it's Antonio Callaway, whether it's Kareem Hunt, on down the line. And I think he felt the same way about Freddie Kitchens, and he fell in love with the story. You could see how the media followed that story. I don't mean the media, like the independent media. I mean, the way the team sold it on billboards and TV spots, and internet ads, and whatever else. And I just felt like that he's going to hit some, he's going to miss some wildly, but it comes from a place of believing in people. And certainly, Freddie was in over his head. He had some qualification for the job. It's not like it's not the same thing as like hiring somebody who had never coached before, but but it didn't work out. Well, but he also doesn't get to make that decision in a vacuum. Like, there's this idea from our vantage point that we want to point at the one person who made the one decision. And like that doesn't actually happen. It takes an owner to sign off. It takes actually two owners and a son-in-law to sign off, not to mention a chief operating officer, presumably. And I mean, so this constant need to find a fall guy really, really bugs me.
Yeah. Well, especially because we can't have the fall guy be the person that it should be. That's right. That's really what it boils down to, is the one person who should lose their job can't lose their job. And that's unfortunate. But, I just think that I agree with everything you said, by the way. And I think I'll always remember Dorsey pretty fondly for the most part, in terms of he was fun to have around, and he sort of for a while made the Browns kind of fun again, and he was a big part of that. And That was all that, those things were all good. It was just, like you said, it was just maybe like one, not one too many, but just a few too many things, that, even go back to the Freddie hire, like we can't sit here and act like, oh man, we all knew that was just going to be a disaster. Like some people had doubts, there's no doubt, but a lot of people were really happy that Freddie got the job. Freddie and Baker's relationship, the previous year when he was offensive coordinator, was awesome. Like that was great to watch. And I don't forget looking at Twitter on Mondays after every game and seeing people diagramming replays of Freddie's plays, showing how brilliant these plays were and how he was creating misdirection and he was doing things that nobody had seen before. Like that was very real. Like that stuff existed. And I think there was this idea like, okay, well, yeah, like Freddie's going to be the coach and he's going to call the plays and he's
but apparently it wasn't Freddie. It was Todd Haley's.
Well, either
it was Todd Haley's offense. It was Ken Zampese. It was all these other people who were there.
I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it too is when you're an offensive coordinator, that's all you're doing all week long is installing that week's plays. Right, you're the offense for that week. You're installing the plays. You're figuring out what's going to be on the play sheet for that week. And, while I think Freddie was probably involved to some degree, but Todd Monken was installing the offense this year. And then he turns it over and then Freddie calls the plays off the sheet. And if you want to know why things felt disjointed, I think that was probably a big part of it too.
When according to Todd Monken, Freddie was abandoning the plan halfway through the first quarter of every game.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's what I'm saying. Like he just seemed, when you had the weight of all these responsibilities as the as the head coach, you have a lot more duties other than just calling plays. And sometimes I think, when you're sitting there and you have to think about on fourth down, you have to think about, are we going for it or not? And then once you decide it, then you have to decide, okay, well, what play are we going to call? You got to figure all that out. Whereas when you're the offensive coordinator, you're just thinking about what play are we going to call on fourth down. And then if the coach says we're going to go for it, you've already got your play. But if the coach says we're going to kick a field goal, it doesn't matter. But when you're the head coach, you have to process like all these different things. And he's constantly got to be thinking about like, well, do I need to call a timeout? Should I challenge this? He's sitting there, he's got to call a play, but he's also trying to get voices in his ear telling him whether he should challenge the previous play or not. There's so many things that go into being a head coach besides just calling the plays. And it just really did feel like it all was too much for Freddie, that he just couldn't handle all these things he had to be in charge of. That I really think he's best suited for, when just being an offensive coordinator. And I'd like to see him get a shot as an offensive coordinator again somewhere sometime and see if he really can do it or if it really was just Ken Zampese and, like you said, Todd Haley's offense. I hope he gets that chance to prove himself again at some point because I do like Freddie.
And one of the reasons that I would let Freddie off the hook is because I just can't blame him completely and totally. He's not the only one who allowed himself to take on all those responsibilities, too many responsibilities. How many times is a Jimmy Haslam led team going to allow a coach, a first-time head coach, whether it's Pat Shurmur or Freddie Kitchens or even a non-first-time head coach and Hugh Jackson come in and call their own plays and be their own, like, how many times?
Yep. You have to wonder, like, even like, do we even know, like, if Kevin Stefanski comes in, what would be his role with the offense?
I got to think McDaniels is going to call his own plays if he comes here.
Yeah. So, like, are we doing it again anyways? Like with this next hire?
So I want to bring up another topic related to this because I was listening to Joe Banner was talking on Andrew Brandt's podcast about Cleveland and the structure and everything else, and he made an interesting point. And obviously it's a little bit self-serving because he was the president of the Browns and he set up.
Can I say though, Joe Banner is awesome to follow, like on Twitter and listen. Like I really enjoy listening to him talk about, and he really makes a lot of sense most of the time. Like, are there some sour grapes? Of course, there's probably sour grapes.
He admits it.
Yeah. So go ahead. I just wanted to sort of preface that I'm actually a pretty big Joe Banner fan.
Yeah, me too. Well, I mean, I wasn't a big fan when he was here, but I also like to follow him. I think he's a smart guy. But he was saying that structurally, the one thing that the Browns seem to keep doing is setting it up where the GM and the coach both answer to ownership. And he was saying Jimmy Haslam is in Cleveland a lot. He's with the team a lot, but he does split time with Tennessee. He's not there every single day all the time. And without that leader, that singular leader in the building, it creates factions, and it lends the culture to create those factions. And so his whole idea was, and still is, that you need to have that central figure. But so two things. Number one, I tend to agree with him. And number two, that also agrees with my opinion about Paul DePodesta and how he can never actually do the full job working from remote. And maybe it's more chaotic to have a guy like that with so much power who's never there. Like you cannot lead from a remote job. You can be a programmer, you can be a customer service rep, you can be maybe just an analytics guy. But now he's helping run the coach search. He's in the owner's ear all the time. Is Jimmy Haslam allergic to cohesive structures?
It's hard because, yes, DePodesta is a very loud voice in terms of picking this head coach, but Haslam has already said that the coach will not report to DePodesta, will report to Haslam. I don't think that DePodesta has that much power. My understanding of it, as people have been saying, he has influence, but I wouldn't say he has power. To me, he is not the guy that's the candidate to be sort of the central guy that's in charge of everything.
Don't you kind of think he got Dorsey fired?
I think it's possible he might have said to Haslam something along the lines of, we cannot let him pick another head coach after what he did last time. Like, I'm sorry, that was such a bad pick that he cannot be allowed to do it again. I think that's definitely possible. I really don't know. Like,
I don't either.
So much, and you hear so many conflicting things, and I don't really know. But I know that every time I hear somebody who actually knows DePodesta talk about him, they don't have a bad thing to say about the guy.
Oh, I agree.
So if I'm not looking at him as really that much of a problem with what's going on with Cleveland. I don't think he's really much of the problem. I think he probably has a lot to offer.
But look at it this way. I think there are a lot of guys, including Chud, who have not been a big problem, and they've all been set up to fail.
And I was going to go back and say, the funny thing is the structure that Joe Banner said, we actually did have for a while with Mike Holmgren. Mike Holmgren was that guy. He had the GM in Tom Heckert. We also had the coach. Originally, he had Mangini, and then fired Mangini and replaced him with Shermer. And then, you realize, though, that's the problem with that system is that guy. I mean, Mike Holmgren just hired a guy because they have the same agent. It was so frustrating. I mean, I still remember how frustrating it was hearing immediately the talk that he was looking at guys that had the same agent as his. And it was
right. If Randy Lerner doesn't sell the team, maybe Holmgren stays in his position, Heckert stays in his position. They just hire a new coach.
But would it just be another one of their guys? You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily the best guy. I don't know.
Maybe not. Maybe he would learn from his mistakes, but Haslam never lets anybody learn from a mistake.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's certainly fair. Nobody gets time to do anything. And I was listening to the athletics podcast.
Civilized Barking?
Yes. And I just really appreciated the fact they talked about how when DePodesta came in with Sashi Brown, and we had Andrew Berry, and we had this very smart, analytics leading front office. And I think not everybody, but a lot of people were pretty excited about it to see what would these guys do? And he talked about how, like, the one time DePodesta talked to the media, and he talked about how, like, well, the problem with going through, this process is the first couple of years are really hard, and it's just important that you have an owner that's patient to let the GM work through all those hard times and get through the rebuilding. And sure enough, 2 years in, what happens? Jimmy gets impatient, fires Sashi Brown, and
wasn't Sashi Brown the GM equivalent of Freddie Kitchens?
I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and defend Sashi Brown. Like, that's not my point.
And you know how I feel about Sashi.
Yeah, it's just, my point is just like, it just goes to show we're always at the whims of Jimmy Haslam, right? Like, none of this really even matters. Like, we can talk about structure till we're blue in the face. Like, there's things I like about the thoughts of Andrew Barry coming back and having Stefanski and DePodesta and Barry. Like, there's something that appeals to me about having a bunch of, like, really smart people working together on the same page, right? Okay, so I can buy into that. Then you can say, well, but there's also something to the fact that, Josh McDaniels can come in and he'll bring one of these New England guys with him, whether it be Ziegler or Caserio or whoever he's going to bring in, and really implement a culture, right? The whole New England culture. But, like, let's be realistic. Like, a couple of years from now, if we're not immediately winning, Peyton Manning's going to, Jimmy's going to bump shoulders with Peyton Manning somewhere and say, hey, do you want to come run the Browns?
Did you hear that one too, by the way? A couple, maybe a week and a half ago, I heard somebody quoting another, so a media member talked to another NFL exec and said, well, what do you make of the Browns coach search, or what do you think is going to happen? And the rival executive quipped, they're going to hire whoever Peyton Manning tells Jimmy Haslam to hire.
Yeah, right.
And he was only half kidding.
No, he was only half kidding. Like, make no mistake, Peyton Manning has a little bit of power in our organization. It is ludicrous. Like, it is crazy. And, like, you would not be surprised if 2 years from now, Peyton Manning is running the Browns.
I wouldn't.
And all the guys are gone.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And I would expect the same contingent of Browns fans to be celebrating the firing of somebody we are addicted to saviors. We have such a savior complex in this town. And I said in the last podcast that, if he was a doctor healing a broken arm, Jimmy Haslam would amputate all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, like, I was thinking about that. Like, I don't like to, like, I'm not going to sit here and, like, try and talk down about the fan base or anything like that. But, like, to some degree, like, we do reflect our owner in some ways. Like, we are an impatient fan base, and, we are quick to, like, to be like, well, okay, this isn't working. We need to do something different, So,
I don't think it's unique to us. I think the only thing unique to us is we've got the jackass owner who's willing to fire everybody, because how many people want Mike Tomlin fired every year? Yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's a really good point. The difference is we're fans. We're supposed to be emotional about it.
Yeah.
You trust that you have the people in place that can, make the right decisions. And unfortunately for us, that we don't have that with the Browns. Probably don't have it with the Cavs either. And that's part of the problem, I guess, of the sports in this city. But yeah, it is what it is.
So now that we've talked through it all and recognizing, by the way, just for the listeners out there, Andrew and I both realize how little we know about any of these coaching candidates. We're not experts. We know basically nothing, but we have opinions. So Andrew, if I had a gun to your head right now and I said, you got to pick one of the guys who's still available, who are you hiring right this second? Because I think I have an answer that might surprise you.
Okay. So am I allowed to say Urban Meyer?
Sure.
It's not realistic, but and maybe coach isn't what I want. Maybe Urban Meyer would be an awesome guy to be the guy in charge. Like, when we talked about having this guy in charge, I think Urban would be great at it.
He is a CEO.
Yes, just be the CEO of the Browns. I think he would actually be great at that. His leadership is off the charts. He's all about preparation and implementing systems for success. I have ultimate faith in Urban Meyer, and I think he would be really successful at it. But I'm not serious about that. I think that I personally would probably go with Stefanski right now. Would be who I would want. I'm just not there with McDaniels. I know, I know people can change, and what's the saying, like, failure is our greatest teacher.
Yep.
So, you'd hope that he learned from what he went through in Denver, but it just worries me when you hear how much power it sounds like he's really going to have. If he comes here, that he wants a lot of power in this franchise, and that just worries me a little bit. I don't. It's probably not the system that I'm really looking for. I find it much more appealing to have, if I'm not sure that Andrew Berry would come in if we get Stefanski, but again, I'll just keep throwing that name out because that's what people are talking about. Having somebody like that come in as your GM, you've got DePodesta handling the strategy and analytics, and Stefanski handling the coaching. Like, I like that structure of them all being on the same page, and I like that. I like that Stefanski has been through a couple different offenses and learned from different types of offenses. I like that he learned a lot from Kubiak and installing that Kubiak/Shanahan offense. So those are the things that I like about it, and that's probably why I would lean that way. But I'm like it drives me nuts this week seeing these people on Twitter who are just certain of who the guy should be. I don't understand that point of view. Like, how many times we pick the wrong guy? And it's not just us. Like, I mentioned it in our Slack channel. Like, I was going back and reading like the previous year's rankings of the best hires. Like, they ranked several media places ranked Freddie as the best hire last year. Doug Peterson was voted as the worst hire in 2016 when the Eagles hired him, and all he did was win the Super Bowl. There's so much we can't know, and I don't understand why people are so certain of who the best guy is. So,
and to that point with Doug Peterson, he had Frank Reich, who then goes to the Colts and has done a pretty good job turning that around. So we always want to look at that one guy, and it's never about that one guy. It's just never about that one guy. So if gun to my head, I got to pick right now. First of all, I love the idea of the Stefanski offense, the zone blocking scheme with Nick Chubb. I think play action passing is perfect for Baker Mayfield. I love it. I love it. I love it. But if I'm picking a head coach right this second, I can't quite bring. I won't be upset if they hire McDaniels. I really won't be. I think he could bring in enough people that all think the same exact way he does, that it could be successful. But if I'm looking at pure leadership, I'm going Robert Saleh.
I like that. I like that pick.
There's
a lot to like about him, by the way.
A ton. And when I look at these candidates, and I told you guys in the Slack channel, when I look at these candidates, what I like to do is I like to look up a random headshot interview of these guys on a random week ahead of a game. And I like to kind of see if I feel like they're the kind of person that would have the ear of an NFL locker room. And it just the way his demeanor and the way he speaks and everything just kind of screams leader to me. And I know that it's so much more, it goes into the job than that, but he's also, he's also got a nice resume. He's qualified for the job. So I'm just assuming he checks all the football boxes.
And I think too, the nice thing about him is you've got the chance that he can bring in either Mike McDaniel or whichever of the LaFleur brothers. I always forget which one is
Mike,
the one that's not coaching the Packers, the brother that's with the 49ers. Hopefully he would be able to bring in one of them to again run the Kyle Shanahan offense for us, which would be super appealing. And I'm with you. Like, I think people talk a lot about winning the press conference. And it's not about winning the press conference for me, but I think real leaders exude a certain quality when they talk. And I've seen it time and time again with coaches at all different levels. And
we knew all we needed to know about Pat Shurmur.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I would say even with Freddie, while Freddie said some things that were fun, like that was meant to fire us up, and if you don't wear orange and brown, you don't matter, and you're supposed to be fun. I can admit that I was a little off put by his introductory press conference. I didn't think he won that. I felt that some of his thoughts came across a little disorganized to me, and I just didn't see like a leader, a guy that would be like the face of the franchise or whatever. And is it Saleh?
Yep.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Saleh.
Yeah, Saleh. You shared that clip, and I watched that clip, and I'm with you. Like when that guy talks, he just exudes that leadership. You can just sense it, and you can just imagine like him commanding an NFL locker room. And so I like all that. I like his experience. I think he seems to be a good coach from what we know. So
he's also not like one of those smooth salesman types. Like he doesn't have that media the media sheen. But
right,
I don't really care about that. Neither did Patton.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think he's just a football guy,
just a blue collar, strap his boots on with his lunch pail,
hit you in the nose or punch you in the mouth.
We're gonna punch you in the nose for 60 minutes every week.
Yeah.
God, we need an opening presser drinking game.
We really do. We certainly get lots of opportunities for it.
Oh my God. Yeah. So anyway, I think we should stop there, but it was good to catch up, man. I appreciate you jumping on and talking about the Cavs and the Browns.
Yeah. I always love to be on. I wish we had more happier things to talk about. It seems like it's always some kind of drama or crisis or something like that. But,
I was joking with our friend Brian Spaeth today, and obviously I don't want to dive down this road, but like I also joke with another friend of mine. Have we had a good day since the Cavs won the championship? It's been all downhill ever since.
It really has. It really has. I mean, truly. Like,
I thought we were turning a corner when we got Beckham. Like I thought all these things.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We could back this up. Like, if you really think about it, like it's like this like gradual like rolling down the hill too. Like, and it started with the Indians World Series then, right? Like. That was the first thing, but that wasn't as bad as it could have been because of the Cavs. We were so fresh off the Cavs that it propped us up. At least, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but it did for me. It propped me up through that. And,
I survived Game 7 because of the Cavs.
Yep. But then it was, Durant's going to the Warriors. Shit. Okay. All right.
The Browns went 1-15.
But maybe we can beat them. And then all of a sudden, then Kyrie wants to be traded, and it's, oh my God! And then we go through the Isaiah Thomas experience, and and then LeBron leaves, and now and then like you said, like the Odell Beckham comes in, and like we think that's going to fix everything.
And meanwhile, the Browns went 1-15 and 0-16.
Yeah. Oh yeah. How did I even skip that?
The perfect season parade.
Yeah, and somehow this year's team seemed even more frustrating than the 0-16 team. Like
almost.
So
anyway, that's how we're gonna leave you guys. Enjoy your weekends. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. All right, we'll talk to you next time. It's been the Waiting for Next Year.com podcast.